The following program is presented by the Theosophical Society in America.
In our first two programs, Ed Abdul began establishing a framework for a theosophical worldview by looking at the implications of the first two fundamental propositions of the secret doctrine. In the first proposition, we began with the most abstract of all theosophical principles, the ultimate real, and saw how its three essential aspects of spirit, the root of matter, and abstract motion are the existent three in one, out of which the universe springs forth. We then said that this triplicity became a septenary, and that all of nature reveals itself in what the theosophical literature describes as the 7 planes of nature. And yet throughout we see a fundamental unity, since all three aspects of the ultimate real pervade life in all its diversity. We demonstrated the existence of this unitive quality in nature by taking a closer look at the idea of motion as it is used in the second fundamental proposition. We saw that motion can make one thing appear to be many things, depending upon its rate of motion. By seeing this unitary principle in the obvious, one can begin to see it in the less obvious, as pervasive in all things and at all levels. In this program, we are going to look further at life's creative processes by continuing our exploration of the septenary principle mentioned earlier. How does it express itself in nature, especially in human nature? Of these 7, we are going to begin with the one considered most abstract, called by the Sanskrit term Atma. In simple terms, Atma is a point in the ultimate real.
Now, thanks a lot, you might say. That doesn't tell me anything. But first of all, let's look at the difference between a point and a dot. A dot represents a point. You'll see that in the diagram. No matter how thin I get that dot, no matter how tiny, even if only a molecule thick, it's still three-dimensional, isn't it? A point, you see, has no dimensions at all. It's just a locus, a location, a mathematical concept, which our minds can entertain. Please be careful to see this, even though we can never see a point. We have within us the ability to understand something so totally abstract as a point. So that point, it is said, is our ultimate eternal nature, and all else is transitory, although some aspects of us last millennia, perhaps, but not forever in the ultimate sense. Now, that is said to be a point in this undifferentiated background, and the only way that we can come close to maybe all of us experiencing it, at least as its nature is to perhaps recall there have been times when we woke up in the morning, and for ever so short a period of time, we just were awake. There was just that feeling of am. Isn't that true of all of us? For just a split second, am. Not where am I? Not what day? Not what are my problems or what are my joys? Nothing. Just beingness. Everyone has had that, haven't they? Just that sense of beingness. That comes close to this idea of raw awareness or unconditioned consciousness. And it said we're a point in that unconditioned consciousness in a sense. Now, you see the objects of consciousness come before us very quickly. Oh, what day is it? Monday. Oh, I have to go to work and deal with that awful boss. Oh, it's Sunday. I have a day off I can sleep in. Oh, I'm going away this week. That's going to be fun. All those things come before us. These are the objects of consciousness that come before us. Now it's said we're one-pointed. Let me just recall to your minds other experiences that every one of you have had. You may be talking on the telephone to a friend, and your wife or husband or someone in the room starts to talk to you. And for a while you try to listen, and you try to carry on both conversations, don't you? And what do you finally do? You finally say, "Excuse me a minute, someone is talking to me. What is it you're saying?" And then you come back, don't you? Why do you do that? Because conscious attention is one-pointed. We can do many things at a time. We can juggle, if we're good, and walk on a tightrope, maybe, and sing a song. That's doing a lot of things at once. But conscious attention is ever one-pointed.
The second human principle from the Theosophical philosophy is called buddhi, and comes from the Sanskrit root bud, which means to awaken. Together, both Atma and buddhi are considered universal principles.
Now, Blavatsky has some interesting things to say about buddhi. She calls it the vehicle of Atma, which doesn't tell us very much. She calls it universal mind. Now, that sounds strange. Doesn't sound so religious now. Then she says it's wisdom, and then a very strange one, it would appear on the surface, bliss. Why bliss? Doesn't seem to fit, does it, with the others? Cosmic ideation and spiritual intuition. Now, I like to use the word insight rather than intuition, simply because intuition to most people means a psychic hunch. That's very real. It's not unreal. We all have had something of that in our lives, probably, even if we've just known who was on the phone when the phone rang. But in the theosophical sense, intuition is getting an insight into something. It is struggling with a problem that we have. Maybe it's a mathematical problem when we're in the 3rd grade. And finally, after a little struggle and furrowing our brow, we finally say, "Oh, I've got it." That's an insight, isn't it? It's an understanding. It's when everything sort of comes together and we comprehend. What happens when you do that? Don't you feel happy? Every time you get an insight, when you really understand something, don't you go, "Oh," and a big smile comes. If it's a little insight, nothing too big, maybe it's not a great big smile, but it's a smile, and you feel rather energized usually. This is the nature of buddhi. Buddhi is not something that is just for so-called spiritual experiences. An atheist is also rooted in this. And every time an atheist gets an insight into a computer problem or into a mathematical problem or into any other situation before him or her, that is a flash from this level of buddhi. Now you see, buddhi is universal. The truth itself, wisdom itself, is there whether my mind gets it or not, isn't it? The earth was always round, even if people thought it was flat. It didn't suddenly turn round when somebody discovered it. It was always that way. But maybe when someone suddenly understood, you see, then that universal truth which was there all along flashed on their mind. So that's why Atma and Buddhi are said to be spirit in the Theosophical philosophy. They are universal. It isn't my truth and your truth. It may be my understanding of truth and your understanding of truth, which may be different, but the truth is going to stay the same no matter whether I get it or I don't, whether I've perverted it or whether I haven't. It'll be there, like gravity, nonetheless, immutable, there all the time. Where it becomes galvanized into life is when it hits our mind, isn't it? Wow, now I've got it, you see. That brings us to the next theosophical principle called manas, mind. And it is that aspect of us which is our true individuality according to the Theosophical philosophy. And it is really obvious, if you think about it, from the examples that I've given, because The truth remains the same. We can accept that idea. Gravity is there whether I understand it or don't, whether I know about it or not. When I understand it, you see, it's individual. I may get an insight that you'll never get. You may get an insight that I'll never get. And it may be valid. It's the getting of it that makes it individual, you see. It's that aspect of us which can know, which is our individual self. And those three aspects, Atma, Buddhi, and Manas, are considered to be the reincarnating ego. That's what survives, not all the rest of us, not all the other parts. This triplicity within us, the beingness itself, the wisdom itself, or the truths themselves, the principles themselves of the universe, and our ability to reflect them or understand and get them. That knower, the one who knows, is that which survives throughout the ages. Now, Manas is a tricky one. The principle of Manas is actually dual in its appearance, though it is not ultimately dual. When our mind turns toward the abstract, toward the conceptual aspect, then it's called Buddhi Manas, because mind has actually turned toward insight, you see, or the level of insight, toward the truths themselves. All of us have the ability, every single human being, to entertain abstract concepts, as I said. Infinity, for example, which we'll never see. Everyone can sort of say, yes, I understand what it is. But even simpler than that, and easier to see, is our language. Every word we use is a concept. We can say chair. We can look at this chair or any